goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown, goodbye to the crown.
Hi there and welcome to The Monarchy here on Press TV. I'm Samson Sees and I'm glad to be your host. For any of you who are not familiar with this program, it happens to provide an exclusive opportunity to shed light on the dark corners of Britain. These are indeed the very issues that mainstream media networks choose not to show you. How suspicious. Coming up in this edition of our show, we'll have a look at what our honourable guests had to say about former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and that controversial invasion of Iraq. And last but not least, we'll be looking at how Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II interferes with certain affairs and chooses to distance herself from others. So if all that sounds like it's out of the ordinary, definitely stay with us. What could possibly emerge when a former leading politician invades a country, leaving it unstable for many years and constantly claims that the right thing has been done, while a vast population around him sees the act as a terrible war crime full of innocent people's blood being spilt? It has in fact been a decade since the UK and the US invaded a small country in the Middle East, which was alleged to have weapons of mass destruction, if you remember. What lies ahead of the future of Iraq? Has it become peaceful since the invasion? Or is the situation worse with the addition of instability across that nation? There are, of course, too many questions to be asked on this matter. So can they be answered at all by the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair? Okay, enough from the studio shots. Here it comes.
Tonight, as we approach the 10-year anniversary of the war in Iraq, we explore how Iraq, Britain and the world changed. I'm with an audience.
In an interview on BBC Two's Newsnight marking the 10th anniversary of UK armed forces joining a US-led invasion of Iraq, the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair tried to defend his decision to invade Iraq in 2003, claiming the country is a safer place after executed dictator Saddam Hussein. Drawing a picture of Iraq today, he claimed of the country being a wealthy country with a strong economy.
There are still terrorist activities that are killing people, killing innocent people for no good reason, but the country as a whole, obviously its economy is growing very strongly, it's got huge amounts of oil revenue.
However, Carol Turner of the British Stop the War Coalition had a different view.
Well, that can be answered in one word. It's absolute rubbish. Rubbish. The country is economically under the thumb of America again. The regions are competitive and conflictual. Oil is under American control. People's everyday lives are still ruined and destroyed for the most part. The situation is terrible. And what was a reasonably well-developed country within the region with a well-educated and progressive population has been knocked back, historically speaking. So no, I don't at all think that the claims that Iraq is better are true. On the contrary, I think Iraq is now in a much, much worse situation than it was at the beginning of the 21st century.
And Sabah Jawad from the Iraqi Democrats Against Occupation drew a grim picture of the current situation.
10 years after the occupation of Iraq, the war and the occupation of Iraq actually, you are very hard pressed to find one achievement as a result of that occupation. In fact, you find many examples of how the country was destroyed, how the US implanted division and conflict in Iraq to keep Iraq fragmented and divided for the foreseeable future. In fact, the occupation since it started before 2003 could not even resolve the issue of fixing the electricity in Iraq or the sewage system and the infrastructure they destroyed during that war and during the 12 years of the economic sanction which was imposed on Iraq after the invasion of Kuwait by the regime of Saddam Hussein. So Iraq was subjected to a lot of measures which actually attacked the heart of Iraqi society, and it's still with us. All these problems are still with us. You could very easily actually rebuild the shattered infrastructure, but it's very difficult to rebuild a society where the seeds of fragmentation and divisions being sowed by the US and Western powers.
Blair tried to argue that his decision and acts leading to the Iraq War were right and justified.
Well, of course, you think about them and the loss of life and the terrible consequences for the families, but in the end, you're elected as a Prime Minister to take these decisions. And the question is, supposing I'd taken the opposite decision. I mean, sometimes what happens in politics, and unfortunately these things get mixed up with allegations of deceit and lying and so on, but in the end, sometimes you come to a decision where whichever choice you take, the consequences are difficult and the choice is ugly.
But was he?
I mean, Tony Blair actually is doesn't even his deputy doesn't even agree with him, because John Prescott, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, then actually came out in the last few days, and he stated categorically that after giving it much thought, the Iraqi invasion was a mistake. So even his deputy will not support the positions of Tony Blair. There are so many rats deserting the ship, the sinking ship, and that's why Tony Blair could not go anywhere in Britain without attracting massive demonstrations and picket against him as well. And this shame will be with him until the last days of his life, because he waged an illegal and immoral war in Iraq with President Bush, and he has to live with the consequences. And there's still, by the way, an inquiry taking place in Britain, and the government is starving this inquiry from crucial documents and details about the conduct of Tony Blair, how he misled the British Parliament, how he misled the British people as well. So the British people, and definitely the Iraqi people, will never forgive or forget what Tony Blair did, not only to Iraq, but to the entire Middle East. That man also is the biggest supporter of the State of Israel in the area, and also supporter of interventions, not only in Iraq, but all over the place as well, as a criminal mentality, basically.
He even tried to hide behind the fake gesture of his government bringing democracy to Iraq.
This was one such case. If we hadn't removed Saddam from power, just think, for example, what would be happening if these Arab revolutions were continuing now, and Saddam, who's probably 20 times as bad as Assad in Syria, was trying to suppress an uprising in Iraq. I mean, think of the consequences of leaving that regime in power. So when you say, do you think of the loss of life and the trouble there's been since 2003? Of course I do, and you'd have to be inhumane not to. But think of what would have happened if he'd been left there.
Did he really bring democracy to the war-torn country?
Well, I mean, this throughout history, actually, imperialist power always use fancy name and honorable intention. They try to gloss over honorable description about what they are doing. I mean, they've done it in Iraq, they've done it in other part of the world. They say we're going to be there for humanitarian reason. That's why so-called humanitarian intervention. We're going to bring democracy and human rights. And we've seen in the past 10 years what's happened in regard to human rights in Iraq and democracy in Iraq as well. In fact, when the Iraqi people rebelled against the regime of Saddam Hussein in 1991, immediately after the invasion of Kuwait, the United States and the Western powers suppressed the huge uprising, which controlled most of the provinces in Iraq then.
10 years on, Some people call you a liar, some people call you a war criminal, protesters follow you. It's difficult for you to walk down the streets of a country where you once had a landslide victory. Do you think Iraq has taken its toll on you?
Look, it really doesn't matter whether it's taken its toll on me,
does.
but the fact is, yes, there are people who will be very abusive. By the way, I do walk down the street, and by the way, I won an election in 2005 after Iraq.
Just a few people being against you, Mr. Blair. Carol could give us a more realistic description of public opinion about Blair.
The overwhelming majority of British opinion was against going to war in Iraq and has remained so. Tony Blair is incredibly unpopular here. When he attends public activities in Britain, there are still groups of people who follow him around, demanding that he's tried as a war criminal, pointing out the hypocrisy of invading Iraq and their opposition in general to the sort of war policies that he pursued.
By the way, is it just Blair to be blamed for the illegal war of Iraq?
Look,
Where does the Queen as the head of state stand? How about the others who benefited from the war?
You asked me earlier about the establishment. What's the establishment do? Under the Constitution, the British Constitution, she's the head of the state. Therefore, she is responsible, like others who decided to invade Iraq and to wage war on Iraq, illegal and immoral war as well. So, putting a signature on a approval to wage such a war is illegal act. And this is actually the symptom of the British establishment, the whole British establishment. In fact, there are some people who oppose the intervention in the United Kingdom, and they said so before the war and after the war. You have the former Foreign Secretary in Britain resigned as a protest of the Iraqi war. There are prominent MPs who also resigned from their ministerial post as well. And the latest voice against the occupation was the deputy leader of the Labour Party, John Prescott, who just announced a few days ago that he realized that actually the decision to go to war was wrong, implicitly criticizing Tony Blair for that decision as well. So the whole establishment, the people that arm industries and the multinational companies, oil companies and so on, they see these type of war and occupation as an opportunity to open businesses and to move in to make huge financial gains from such adventure. Not only the arm industries, but and the same, which is also true by the oil companies and the financial companies and the bank who wants to move in a crucial area and a very important area in the Middle East to get a lot of profit. And this is particularly useful for them because they suffer from financial crisis and financial collapse in the West.
You might have guessed, we've reached the part where we'll be zooming in on the British monarchy again. But what's it all about this time? Well, there has been, of course, a notorious sex abuse scandal involving certain disgraced television stars, which flooded the UK media and badly hit the British Broadcasting Corporation, better known as the BBC. And for some reason, Her Majesty has been incredibly quiet about the whole thing, but not quiet regarding other political issues. Oh, and just to reassure you, all this did take place before the British Queen's recent stay in the hospital over that stomach bug. Anyways, the head of state is now out and about, and we're also out and about to give you this.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, who recently raised public outcry for stepping out of her constitutional limits and intervening in a high-profile extradition case, is now keeping a low profile in a scandal in which she has been directly involved. Back in September, it emerged that the Queen privately lobbied a British Home Secretary in the former Labour administrations to arrest British Muslim cleric Abu Hamza. At the time, the BBC's secretary correspondent Frank Gardner revealed the Queen confided to him that she had asked Labour ministers to deal with Abu Hamza, in effect breaking the constitutional principle of leaving the governing to the government.
Welcome to January the 1st, 1964.
Meanwhile, she has been keeping a low profile in the child abuse scandal of the BBC host Jimmy Savile, known as the worst crisis to hit the corporation in 50 years. The Queen has been hiding from the scandal since October 2012, when examining claims of sex abuse against the former TV presenter led to broad media coverage and a rapidly growing body of witness statements and sexual abuse claims. She refused to comment on the subject despite the fact that the scandal was a moral issue directly involving her and public interest. The Queen keeps silent despite the fact that the BBC is run by 12 trustees directly appointed by her, and she herself granted Savile knighthood.
When the full force of the affair broke in October this year, the BBC's management system proved completely incapable of dealing with it. The level of chaos and confusion was even greater than was apparent at the time.
Savile was actually knighted when his abuse was well underway, and the Queen should have distanced herself and the royal family from the paedophile immediately after allegations of his perverted activities to ward off unwanted speculation. However, there has been no comment by the Queen herself, her office, or the royal family, as if she knew of Savile's scandalous behaviour and decided to decorate him regardless.
I find it quite scary, the fact that people who had the power to stop him didn't use that power and didn't stop the man, and the man went on to do the most absolutely horrific things to people in the most awful circumstances, and there was nobody that was prepared to speak up and put a stop to it.
Some claim that the Queen could be aware of the true scale of the scandal that is still unknown to much of the public and even investigators.
How many sexual harassment complaints have there been at the BBC since back each year, since the 1960s?
I'm afraid I don't answer that, Mr. Davis, but I'm very happy to try and get the answer for you, of course.
Have you not looked into how many complaints have been about sexual harassment at the BBC? Is that not a bit of interest to you as the Director General?
It's very much of interest to me at the moment to ensure that the existing structures are in place to deal with new allegations of sexual harassment. That's what I've been focusing on. But I'm very happy, of course, to get hold of any data I can to answer your question.
But I'm just surprised that yet that isn't something that you've wanted to find out for yourself without me having to ask you. I would have thought that one of the first things that you would have wanted to do was to say, well, hold on a minute, we've got a problem here. This is clearly a cultural problem. Well, let's go back and let me see how many complaints we've been having at the BBC about this.
I have made inquiries about the current scale of activity and complaints, but I haven't made those historical inquiries.
So how many complaints have there been in the last couple of years then, for example?
I can't give you a firm answer to that question.
So you haven't even looked at what the current situation is?
I've asked whether or not there are significant numbers, and I've been assured there are not significant numbers at the moment. But
well, what's a significant number? What I mean, surely one complaint of sexual harassment is too many in the BBC. So I mean, what when you ask for other significant number, what sort of number did you have in mind?
Well, to be honest, I would be worried if there were anything in excess of 5 a year.
So up to 5's okay?
No, up to 5 is not okay. I'm not suggesting that for a moment.
And here comes a new wave of embarrassing revelations about a long-time star of the British soap opera Coronation Street being involved with child sex offences, including rape and indecent assault. Michael Lavelle, who has played mechanic Kevin Webster on the show for 30 years, faces 19 charges. Police say the charges relate to offences against a child between 2001 and 2010. Will the Queen insist to distance herself from ever-growing scandals in the UK media as she did in the Savile case? What is clear is that her silence begs more serious questions, but still less answers.
Well, that just about does it for this week on the controversial topics we've explored on the one and only UK. We hope you found this angle of information useful and somewhat educational. But remember, if you wish to talk to us about anything to do with Britain, you can always message us by writing on our Facebook wall. That's UK Desk Press TV. Go ahead and add us. Or if you prefer, you can simply send us your emails via britain@presstv.ir, as your ideas and opinions are always appreciated here. So, keep on watching the monarchy, as the monarchy will keep on watching Britain. Until our next episode, take care, stay well, and goodbye from me and the team.
Poacher come with his poacher's gun, out in the woods to shoot someone. My lord, your time has come, right between the eyes. Felled his master not by chance, away with pomp and circumstance. Come join our merry dance.